Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? GLP-1s. They're being called miracle drugs, used to lose weight and treat diabetes, even addiction. All major drivers of America's chronic disease epidemic. Roughly 30 million people in this country say they're currently on a GLP-1. And it appears to be working, transforming the lives of diabetics. And incredibly, we're seeing the first indications that the obesity rate in America may be beginning to tick down. Does this mean we'll see a decrease in all the weight-related chronic health issues that are wreaking havoc on American health? So in the context of making America healthy again, with Maha's focus on eating healthier, living more active lives, getting at the root causes of our illnesses, getting away from pharmaceuticals always being the solution to our problems, how does this blockbuster pharmaceutical fit? Who's going to take credit if it turns out it's Ozempic that's truly making America healthier? Or are GLP-1s less a miracle breakthrough and more a symptom of America's over-medicated, dysfunctional, easy way out mentality of managing chronic disease? Always relying on the next miracle intervention, yet again letting the food industry off the hook. We all just swallow a pill and don't worry about all the other stuff that is way harder to fix. We're joined by a phenomenal group of doctors who think about GLP-1s a lot, and they're going to help us unpack all of this. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Why Should I Trust You? So not gonna lie, I'm really excited about this episode. I'm really doing everything I can not to make this about my own personal weight loss journey. Tom?
Tell us about it.
This is not about me.
You just made it personal.
I just made it personal. So GLP-1s, Ozempic, it's been wild watching this stuff take off. I know a lot of people who swear by this stuff. And quite honestly, it's sort of entered this arena of a conversation around chronic disease as well. And we have a great group today to help us get our heads kind of around all the implications of these drugs. In a moment, we'll be joined by a good friend of our pod, Dr. Rachael Bedard, who wrote a piece about GLP-1s in New York Magazine, Dr. Mariela Glandt, who looks at the impacts of GLP-1s in her patient community, and also just the chronic disease epidemic in general, and Dhruv Khullar, who's also written several pieces on this topic for The New Yorker. But first, who are we? I'm Brenda Adhikari.
I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark Abdumalik.
Yeah, Mark is a doctor and a medical reporter. Maggie's a virologist, and Brenda and I are journalists. And as you know, please reach out to us at whyshoulditrustyou.net. And also be sure to head over to our Substack.
Okay, so before we get to our guests, it's going to be a really good conversation. Tom, what do we need to know about these things? What are GLP-1s?
Okay, I'll answer that by asking you a question. Does anyone know what a Gila monster is?
Wait, Gila?
Yeah, it's pronounced Gila, but spelled Gila.
Are those the things that Darwin studied in the Galapagos?
No.
Those are the Gila
Pretty
cells
close,
that we
Brenda.
studied.
Are they
It's a big...
Galapagos Islands?
It's like a 2 foot long lizard that lives in the desert, right? The Gila monster, I bring this up for a reason, is what directly led to this multi-billion-dollar health revolution that in the end might be the single biggest thing that we look back upon this Make America Healthy Again time period.
I'm Googling Gila monster right now. Okay, keep going.
Actually, I need to do that too. Good idea.
Yes,
Brenda.
I got a picture on your, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So in 1990, a researcher named John Eng was collaborating with this other guy named Jean-Pierre Rothman, and they were poking around with Gila monsters. And together they noted that the Gilas eat just a couple meals a year, and yet their bodies function just fine. And in the lizard saliva, they discovered a hormone that helped keep the animal's blood sugar levels well regulated. So long story short, Eng forked out his own money. He patented this discovery. He spent like a vacation working the phones to try and find a pharmaceutical company interested in researching maybe a possible treatment for diabetics. And he was onto something. In a healthy body, as we know, when you eat something, it sets off a chain reaction. And when we digest our food, it's converted into sugar. That sugar enters our bloodstream, flows around, goes to our cells. At the same time, our small intestine fires off a hormone called GLP-1. And that's a short-lived message that pings your brain to say, hey, stop eating, you're full, or no, you don't really want to eat right now. But the GLP-1 also goes to your pancreas and says, make insulin. And that's really important because the insulin that your pancreas makes acts like a key that unlocks your cells. So they absorb that sugar and convert it into energy. In the body of someone with type 2 diabetes, their cells become resistant to that insulin. So the glucose or the sugar, which is the food your cells need to create energy, that stuff doesn't enter the cells. Medical folks call that insulin resistance. And a bunch of bad things start to happen. Your pancreas tries to compensate by making more insulin, but over time it just can't keep up. And the end result is that the sugar stays elevated in a type 2 diabetic's blood. And when that happens over and over a long period of time, with that glucose just circulating with nowhere to go, it starts to act like an irritant on the body. And we start to see damage to kidneys, to your heart, to your limbs, even your eyes. And it's just the horrors of what we think of when we think of type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, Tom, what you're describing is sometimes people call it you're starving in the midst of plenty. So there's so much sugar everywhere, but your body's starving. So you can really start to feel the tragedy of exactly what type 2 diabetes is. I mean, obviously, we know it's a major medical problem, it's a major health problem. And if we solved it, we would solve a lot of people's health crises. And it raises a kind of obvious question. Can we help the body manage all this sugar overload just in a much smarter way? I mean, we've been trying for a long time. We have lots of things. We give people insulin, we give people drugs to help regulate their sugars. We have, continuous monitors. We have all this stuff. But what we're going to talk about today is Tom's little lizard that he met, this reptile-inspired experimentation. And what if that lizard could help us take that GLP-1 hormone our body makes and make it last longer? Like, our body already kind of knows how to do it, but could we give something to the cells of a person with type 2 diabetes, just more time or some pathways to help bring those sugars level down? So you could open up and use that sugar rather than just letting it, kind of corrode the body. And I know that sounds kind of crude, but, all of this extra sugar, just your body doesn't know what to do with it. So the drugs that we've heard so much about, and here are some of the names that if you watch TV, if you talk to anybody, these names probably sound familiar to you by now. Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, Trulicity. I mean, they all do just that. They are engineered versions of the natural hormone, but they've been tweaked so they last longer in our body. So to work those cells, to work our pancreas, to work our liver, to figure out how we can actually take in that sugar so it doesn't just rattle around and hurt our body. Now, Eng licensed the patent to a pharmaceutical company, and in 2005, the first GLP-1 treatment was a synthetic version of that Gila monster peptide, and that hit the market. But there was a real downside. Can you imagine being injected twice a day? Obviously, that's a real barrier. So we can figure out, science is amazing, enter Danish pharmaceutical giant Novo Nordisk. They took on a different approach. They engineered still a longer lasting version, but this time they based it on human GLP-1, which eventually produced the drug semaglutide. Now, after years of Ozempic being on the market for diabetics, they realized just how effective it was, not only at helping people control their blood sugars, but helping people lose weight. So now, new marketing, enter Wegovy. It's the same drug as Ozempic, just a higher dose, and it's FDA approved specifically for obesity. So again, Ozempic is FDA approved specifically for diabetes, and a lot of people take Ozempic off label for weight loss. So zooming out, what do these drugs do and how do they do it? So at a basic level, they slow down the digestion process. They make you feel fuller, so you don't want to eat as much. They also, and kind of what we're going to talk about today, they act on the appetite centers of your brain. They dial down hunger and cravings. We've heard people say food noise. Oprah has talked about this. It just quiets down. There's just less of it. Diabetics, though, it helps them produce more insulin. It helps their pancreas release more insulin, but not all the time. If you had your pancreas on like overdrive releasing insulin all the time, your blood sugar would tank. And that's how these drugs are actually so amazing. So it only works and it only helps when your blood sugar is actually high. So it's like a smarter custom designed system, which is why these drugs rarely cause dangerous low blood sugar level crashes, which used to happen with other diabetes medications that we used.
Yeah, and for diabetics, it's obviously been really transformative. And we're seeing for weight loss that people are losing up to 20% of their body weight. And the surprises just keep coming. So researchers are finding that these drugs may reduce the risk of heart attacks, even strokes. And this is in patients who don't have type 2 diabetes. We're also finding a modest but really meaningful association with reduced risk of things like dementia and seizures. So well beyond the initial indication.
Yeah, and all of this, of course, is coming during this moment when the MAHA movement has the reins of federal health and is trying to get to the root of our chronic health issues such as obesity, and also rejecting what they often see as the over medication of America as the go-to solution. And just looking at the numbers, we said that 12% of adults of American adults are now reporting to be on these drugs, and it just speaks to the popularity. And it's interesting, those that are not on them, 4 in 10 adults who have been diagnosed as obese or overweight told KFF they are very interested in taking them. So there's a lot more Americans about to come online with these drugs. So the journey of the MAHA movement and the journey of this blockbuster drug intersected this fall when the Trump administration struck a deal with the drug makers to dramatically lower GLP-1 prices for Medicare patients. They also pledged to find ways to make them available to Medicare patients, not just for diabetes, but also for obesity. We'll see where that leads things. But at that White House event, Kennedy, who had previously been very critical, very skeptical of these drugs, said, quote, "It's not a silver bullet, but that the moves will allow people who are, quote, locked into high-risk obesity to finally lose weight, to reset, and then start doing the kinds of things that will address the root causes of obesity." So the White House is right to focus on cost. They're expensive, over $1,000 a month. And while insurance will cover a chunk of that, depending on what plan you have, more than half of all users report difficulty affording them. And that's one of the reasons that's cited for why as many as half of patients on GLP-1 medications discontinue them within a year. And studies tell us if you do that, you could gain back up to 2/3 of the weight that you just lost. There's other short-term side effects, reportedly nausea, vomiting, that sort of thing. And in rare cases, they can lead to serious problems like pancreatitis and gallbladder issues. We're still very much in the wait and see kind of time period about longer-term effects. And finally, it's worth noting that some people worry that these drugs just take the pleasure out of eating, which some say, means taking the pleasure out of life.
So everything we've talked about so far is in this like weight loss world, diabetes world, but there's one other benefit that caught our attention and something that we should keep our eye on. Scientists are looking at what these medications do in our brains. We have a dopamine reward system in our brain, and that can fuel addiction. And we're going to talk to Dhruv about that in a bit.
Yes. Okay. That was good. That was super meaty. I love it. When we come back, we're going to be joined by Rachael Bedard, Dhruv Khullar, and Mariela Glandt. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. And we are so happy to be joined by our guests today. First up, we have Dr. Rachael Bedard. Rachael is an internist, geriatrician, and palliative care physician whose work focuses on health, human rights, and justice. She teaches, advocates, and writes. She is a contributing writer for the New York Times, and she's written for the New Yorker. And she wrote that article we talked about in New York Magazine about GLP-1s. Hi, Rachael.
Hi, guys. Glad to be here.
Dr. Dhruv Khullar is a staff writer at The New Yorker covering medicine, healthcare, and politics. And he, too, has written several pieces on GLP-1s, including one that is in The New Yorker this week. Check it out. Dhruv is also a practicing physician and associate professor at Weill Cornell Medical College. His research on how to make healthcare more effective and cheaper, as well as on medical innovation, has been published in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. Hi, Dhruv. How are you?
Hey, great to be with you.
And finally, Dr. Mariela Glandt is a Harvard and Columbia trained endocrinologist with more than 20 years of experience treating diabetes. She's the founder and CEO of ONA Health, a virtual clinic that helps people, especially in underserved communities, manage and even reverse type 2 diabetes and obesity through nutrition-focused, doctor-led care designed to reduce reliance on medications. Welcome to Why Should I Trust You, Mariela?
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, so let me start. I'll address this to Rachael first. I was kind of like just looking at headlines, and even just this morning in the Minnesota Star Tribune, great paper, by the way, there was a headline that said, fewer Minnesotans are obese. Should weight loss drugs get the credit? And it goes on to talk about literally the obesity rate in the last couple of years in Minnesota has gone down. And they're looking at whether that change syncs with the growing use of weight loss medication. So, Rachael, just really more broadly, and we'll ask everyone this, are GLP-1s quickly becoming the sort of structural fix for America's obesity crisis, the tool that's like finally going to liberate us from the epidemic of chronic disease? Like, is this in fact how we get there?
So I don't think of GLP-1s as a structural fix. Like, I think the way, when I think about a structural fix, I think about why are Americans so obese to begin with? And that is that the answer to that's really complicated. We're going to talk about it, I'm sure, during this hour. But it's related to our food system. It's related to the sort of way that people don't exercise enough in this country, et cetera, et cetera. And GLP-1s doesn't fix any of that, right? GLP-1s doesn't fix sort of those structural reasons that have led to an obesity crisis, both amongst children and adults in this country. But what I do think is really wild about GLP-1s is that since there's sort of more widespread adoption, people who are taking them and who have tolerated them and have continued taking them, they lose weight really quickly. And really quickly relative to sort of anything we've ever had before to offer them as an intervention in sort of standard clinical practice. And so if you try to look at something like, this is the first time in a really long time that Americans have lost weight rather than gained weight year over year. Do I think that's due to the GLP-1 sort of revolution? I think it's hard not to say that it's at least playing a really significant role, even though at the same time, I don't know if I would call it a structural fix. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to put that same question to Dhruv. I like that you picked up on that phrase, structural fix. I mean, what does that, when you hear that, Dhruv, what goes through your mind?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Rachael just shared. I mean, I think when you think about structural factors that contribute to obesity, probably number one on the list is the food supply and the overabundance of ultra-processed foods and other nutrient-poor, high-calorie foods that contribute to people eating in a way that they, didn't half a century ago. You think about things like the built environment and how difficult it is for many people to get out and walk in their neighborhoods, and how our whole society seems to be set up to get people maybe in cars or not moving their bodies in the way that we did in the past as well. So there are all sorts of kind of structural factors that are contributing to people putting on weight over time. But I agree. I mean, for the first time in half a century, basically, we are seeing obesity rates across the country plateau and even decline in some places. And it's hard not to make the argument that with the rise of these GLP-1 medications, with tens of millions of Americans having at least tried these medications, that they are not part of what is starting to bend that curve.
Marielle, I want to ask the question maybe just slightly differently to you, because I have a sense of kind of your point of view on some of these things. Is it fair to say that one of the things that the GLP-1 medications are revealing is that losing weight is really not a factor of weak character, i.e., if you fail on a diet, it has less to do with your failure of determination and more to do with whether it's things going on in your brain or your hormonal system, things that are sort of like out of your control, and GLP-1s come in and actually make it a fair fight. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you see this differently?
Well, I think that one of the things that we've been telling people is that they're weak if they can't follow a diet, and that we've been giving the advice of eat less, move more. And this advice normally tends to fail. So I really want people to understand that this is not their fault. because this advice that lowers calories will lead to failure. We've known this for 50 years. Decreasing calories over time makes the body feel deprived, and then energy expenditure goes down, and that leads to failure inevitably. So I think that, first of all, we've been giving the wrong advice. So let's start there. And yes, we are, we definitely have many hormonal systems that make us gain weight again. And GLP-1s are an incredible tool to decrease these cravings. But I think that we need to start with what is the problem with our advice that makes weight loss so difficult? I think that's where we need to start.
You think it's the advice that we've been giving that has just been ineffective? Like, just tell me a little bit more about what hasn't been able to bend the curve like GLPs seem to maybe be doing.
Well, when we tell people to eat less, what happens is that they end up starving. They're unhappy, and there are many hormones that will just really sabotage this process. But it doesn't matter how you lose weight. This is why I really care about a low carbohydrate diet as advice, because in this type of diet, what happens is that you increase energy expenditure. So it makes it easier, actually, if you're able to hold on to the diet, which in and of itself is, of course, we all know it's challenging, but a lot of that has to do with the environment. But you have increased satiety, very similar to GLP-1s. So your brain stops searching for food all the time. There's a quiet, there's satiety. And this happens, it's a hormonal change that happens through lowering insulin levels, which is what actually GLP-1 drugs do, as well as a very low carbohydrate diet. So,
but talk about easy. Don't tell me that's easier than a little injection or a little pill.
No, I think that GLP-1s are a very helpful way of achieving this. But I think that we have to understand that we need to take responsibility for telling people that, having dry chicken with a little bit of lettuce is the way to go. So I think that 50 years of that has made the establishment, all the medical establishment, really skeptical that any lifestyle advice will make any difference. So let's just move on to GLP-1s ASAP, right? Because we don't think that our advice helps.
Well, that's a really interesting way of putting it, that what I'm hearing you say is it's almost like because one method didn't work, we're now going to this other method, and maybe I'm hearing you say that maybe it's too fast and easy of a fix. But even before we get there, and Dhruv and Rachael, I'd address this to you guys, that let's just talk about our relationship to obesity and chronic illness for a second as a country. I want to read something, Rachael, that you wrote in your New York Magazine piece, and you had been talking about all the sort of writing around GLP-1s, and you had said, quote, "Not one of the first-person essays and opinion pieces that I read last year was written by a person with serious chronic illness. Never hearing this perspective means we don't actually understand the experiences of the people who most stand to gain from Ozempic's arrival." So help me understand what you mean when you said that, like, what is it that you think is missing from the current conversation around GLP-1s?
Yeah, so that's a piece that was published at the beginning of 2024. And 2023 is the year that I think of as being sort of like the really breakout year for GLP-1s, when they became really like a cultural phenomenon, as opposed to something that sort of people in the medical field sort of knew about or knew was coming. And during that year that they had this like cultural breakout in 2023, there was basically an op-ed or a first-person essay or a think piece about them in every sort of major legacy outlet. It felt like multiple times a month. Those pieces and that discourse focused very much, first of all, they were called weight loss drugs, right? And that's still sort of how they get referred to in the popular press, as weight loss drugs, even though they had been developed to treat diabetes as their primary use. So they were called weight loss drugs, and then the entire discourse like sort of swallowed them into the weight loss discourse and the body image discourse. And So, it was like about like which celebrities were taking them. It was about people using them to like lose 10 pounds of baby weight or before their weddings. It was about whether it was going to sort of bring us back to, and we'd done all of this hard work in the culture around body positivity, and where we're going to undo that by bringing these drugs back into the picture, et cetera, et cetera. And it was very strangely to me a discourse that sort of had nothing to do with the way that what I was excited about with these drugs, which was, I am incredibly excited about their weight loss impact. But I was particularly excited because by then we already knew that they were that they were remarkably effective, not just for diabetes, but for a host of comorbidities related to diabetes and downstream complications of diabetes, including that they seem to prevent all-cause mortality when you took them for only a few years. And I think it's hard for people outside the medicine field to understand what a remarkable result that is for a randomized control trial, that if you take something, when you put people on medication for only a few years, you see an all-cause mortality effect. That was really startling, and it was really exciting. And for the patient population that I take care of, and I work now in a homeless clinic in Brooklyn, almost all of my patients have overweight or obesity. The majority of them have diabetes or metabolic syndrome, which is sort of pre-diabetes with some high cholesterol, high blood pressure, or close to high blood pressure. They have the complications that are associated with heart disease and having strokes and proceeding to kidney failure and all sorts of things. The GLP-1s are a bit of a miracle drug for that population. And the population I take care of, because they are homeless, they have very little control over their own diets. They're fed what they're fed in the shelters. They can't afford to supplement with other things necessarily. And so, and in the New York City context where I work, we also had this incredible privilege where in our public hospital system, we were able to prescribe them for my patient population. So I was prescribing to people who are Medicaid patients who otherwise would not have been able to afford them in most other places in the country. We could prescribe GLP-1s. They had access. They could pick them up. They were getting paid for. And for my population, they are a miracle drug because they, in a single medication, address all of those complications at once. They do help people lose weight who do not have a ton of control over their food choices. And I was so excited about that. And the disconnect between my clinical experience and this discourse was frankly incredibly frustrating to me, and really highlighted from the quote that you read, Brenda, this fact that I just think this is not just a GLP-1 problem, but in sort of the popular discourse around health, it's very focused on healthy people and their anxieties. And it's not very focused on the experience of people who live with chronic illness. It doesn't focus on what do GLP-1s mean for diabetics who are on their way to potentially getting a limb amputated. And there are thousands and millions of people around this country like that. It doesn't focus on the experience of people who are on dialysis, like sitting in a dialysis chair for several hours, multiple days a week, right? And the sort of disparity between who we talk about and who we sort of angst about when we talk about new medical interventions or new health breakthroughs or health culture or all of these things, and who actually is suffering with illness and with the consequences of the chronic disease epidemic, that disparity is really, it's really frustrating to me. And so that's what that piece is about.
Yeah, you're making a really good case for these populations that perhaps don't have the luxury to sort of talk about the anxiety that they feel about this stuff. But Dhruv, I also am picking up, and I'll just speak personally, that, it's so funny. Like, I both see their incredible power and potential, but like something about it also sits a little uncomfortably for me, if I'm being like perfectly honest. The idea of a medicine being kind of a miracle drug almost feels like a parable that we're like in the Bible of like, be careful of that golden pill that you take that seems like it's perfect. And then in 50 years, we're going to find out that it has some other deleterious effect, which I know we're not seeing that right now. But I guess my question for you is like, what is it about this conversation that makes us uncomfortable? Is it our sort of naturally adversarial relationship with the pharmaceutical industry, with the idea of, even as public health, that you focus on things from a population health place, and it's the system and healthcare, and you have to regulate the food industry, and then suddenly a pill comes around and seems to sort of solve for it all? Like, is that what is at the root of our discomfort?
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think it's good to have a healthy dose of skepticism whenever someone raises terms like wonder drug or miracle drug. At the same time, I think that these really are kind of the closest we have to something like that. And for the reasons that Rachel mentioned, I mean, there are so many comorbidities that are associated with obesity. I mean, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, types of cancer. And these medications, even independent of weight loss, in some cases, reduce your risk for those conditions, which suggests that although they are doing interesting things with regard to helping people lose weight, there may be other mechanisms, potentially anti-inflammatory mechanisms, through which they're reducing your risk for other types of things. And so, I think it's important to have a degree of skepticism. And to understand that they're not going to be a miracle cure for everyone. We know that something like half or even more of people end up coming off these medications within a year of starting them. And that could be because of side effects. That could be because of access. That could be because of cost. And a drug is not going to work if you're not able to take it. And, as we've talked about, a lot of the health effects diminish or even reverse once you're off the medications. And so I think there are certainly things that we need to be monitoring. The other thing that I'll point out is that we talk about GLP-1s over the past couple of years because they've blown up on social media and they have become more powerful over time. But the first GLP-1 medications are more than 20 years old now. And so, when we talk about this, risk for a certain type of side effect or long-term health risk that we're not understanding at this time, I think that gives me some comfort. The first drug I think was approved in 2005 or 2006. You had to take it twice a day. A few years later, there was one that was approved that you took once a day. And now, of course, many people only have to take them once a week. And as they have gotten, longer lasting, they've also become more powerful in many ways. And so it's not to say that some of these newer generation GLP-1s might not have effects that we haven't seen with the earlier ones, but it's not a completely new and unknown molecule that we're just starting to put in people and we have no idea what might happen tomorrow.
I just pick up on what Brenda was talking about because I sense it too. And I sort of connected with, I think, Rachel, on that piece you wrote a couple of years ago. You noted that these things were popping up, these drugs were popping up right at the same time as people were sort of coming to terms with the beginnings of AI in their personal lives. It just sort of is all kind of a piece in a way. Like there's really, really hard things. Like these things have been very, very, very hard. Like thinking, writing. All of a sudden you have ChatGPT. It's easy. Press a button. It's magical. Takes care of it for you. Diet, really, really hard. Really, really, really hard. All of a sudden, you have medication. It's magical. Weight starts shedding off. I don't know if this is like a philosophical question or you could answer it thinking about our biology and how you really need to confront like our food environments and getting healthier food to people or taking on the food industry. And that's the core problem here. But like, do any of you guys fear that we're just like skipping over hard work because we had these new, modern, incredible, almost magical resources at our fingertips suddenly? And I maybe we'll go to Mariela with it because we'll let you chime in here.
Well, I think that these drugs are helpful, but for really sick people, actually, I find for really severe diabetics, okay, they're not. They help a little bit, but they're not enough. And so I don't want to state this because I don't think that they're magical. There are a lot of people that don't respond as much. Also, the effect goes away over time in many, many cases, and we have a lot of side effects. So I think that we need to understate this. So this is a little bit overemphasized, the magical part. A lot of people, like was just mentioned, 50%, about 50% stop after a year. So, and a lot of people don't ever want to get near it after they try it once. So anyway, first of all, I don't think that they're magical. Like I said before, I think that they can really help. Now, I really like what you're saying about this new feeling of like just press a button and fix this. It's kind of there is something to what you're saying, but the problem here is that it does not address the root cause of diabetes or insulin or obesity, both of which are insulin resistance. You're not really addressing the root cause with this drug. You're just putting a Band-Aid on it. So, it's just not going you're not going to get to the solution that you really want with this. It's going to be a temporary Band-Aid, and it's going to be great, but I don't think that we're going to get to the satisfaction that we want. We're not going to get the relief. Oh my God, we cured the obesity and diabetes problem, because we haven't, because we're not dealing with the root cause. And so this Band-Aid, the minute you take off the Band-Aid, the minute you don't have access to the drug, you're just going to gain that weight again. And you're not going to, we haven't solved the problem. So I think we need to just first address the fact that we're not really solving the problem. We're just covering it up for a bit. We're going to see an improvement. It is a great help. But what we really need to do is we must couple this with lifestyle intervention. Otherwise, we're not going to get that improvement that we want to see long-term, that magical thing, that magical, effect is not going to happen unless we actually combine it with lifestyle. I really feel very strongly about this.
Dhruv, what do you, I mean, I don't hear a lot of people saying like, how's your insulin resistant levels doing today? They say like, did you take the weight off? Like,
Yeah.
do you think we're short circuiting something here?
Well, I think a lot of what Mariela shared is really important. And I think that these are a really important new tool in the toolbox for how we address a public health problem. It should not replace efforts to change the food environment, to change the built environment, to engage people in diet and exercise regimens. All those are still really important part of a comprehensive response to a public health problem that has slowly accrued over the past several decades. I think what's important to point out is that these are an incredible new tool that we should use in conjunction with a lot of those other efforts. The other thing that I'll mention is, some of this comes down to how you view obesity and its related complications. We don't say to people who have had cancer or heart disease that they're taking the easy way out when they use a particular medication to treat those conditions. And we do say that in obesity. And part of that is because I think there's this sense that it's more of a behavioral condition, potentially, that people have more of a choice over what they eat and how much they move. And I think, obesity is a confluence of factors, genetic, environmental, behavioral. But I don't, I guess I reject the notion that by using a medication, people are taking the easy way out, and that they should have to somehow work for the health gains that they're getting from those medications.
Rachel, you had a thought.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo, I think elements of what both Mariela and Dhruv said. I think the GLP-1s inspire us to speak with this like mystical language. Like, is this a magic pill? It's not. It's a medicine. And medicines are a category of intervention that have potential and limitations. And GLP-1s, for me, amongst new categories of drugs that have come out in my 20-year career, are as exciting a new innovation as I have seen. I do think that they are going to revolutionize the treatment of a lot of different conditions and just the general practice of primary care. But they're not magic. And I think to sort of imbuing them with magic, then sort of judging them based on are they as magic as people think, I think is kind of building them up too much and then tearing them down too quickly. Compare them to other medicines. And compared to other medicines, including other medicines for diabetes, they are remarkably effective in terms of their efficacy, not just for diabetes directly, but for the related comorbidities. We sort of have nothing else that I think is as exciting in terms of the comprehensive set of conditions that it's addressing all at once. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing I was going to say was that one of the things that I really like about them is that they absolutely, prescribing GLP-1s does not absolve us of having to think about all of the structural factors that we've been naming. But for individual behavioral change, one of the things that I really like about them is that because of the way in which they change people's appetite and they change their food noise. I don't know if that term has come up yet today, but this, this sort of sense of this voice in your head that's always thinking about what you're going to eat next. And people who are on GLP-1s just very consistently report that food noise just quiets down when they're on the drug. And because they help people lose the first really challenging to lose 10, 20 pounds. One of the things that I really like about them is that if you couple them with lifestyle change, which is how they are supposed to be prescribed, they really help people initiate lifestyle change, feel encouraged that it's helping them, and engage in habit change over time. Whereas trying to get people to change habits from 0 to 60 is really, really, really hard. And so one of the things that I also am a little bit less sort of anxious about the fact that people come off of them. I think that there are a million different subpopulations who are taking these drugs now, some for sort of really clear indications that line up with the studies that have been done, many who are taking them for sort of soft indications, or what I'll call soft indications, because they want to lose weight, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we know yet exactly who needs to be on these drugs truly forever, who needs to be on these drugs for a duration of time until they've lost a certain amount of weight or achieved certain goals, and then whether you could potentially titrate them off. I think we're going to learn all of that as we use them more. And I think one of the things we're going to learn about is how to couple them with effective lifestyle change in a way where potentially the drug is like an a Kickstarter to helping people change their behavior in a way that then sustains even after they come off the medicine.
Rachael, there are going to be many more types of GLP-1s in the near future. And so, we have several GLP-1s that people take today, but already there will be more medications that hit different receptors that are more able to be taken orally as opposed to injectables that may have different side effect profiles for people. Another big area of concern is that people end up losing muscle when they lose weight on these medications. And there's a lot of research going on how to try to preserve that muscle. I mean, some of that, can and should be done through protein intake and strength training, of course. But these, a lot of pharmaceutical companies are looking into ways in which to modify GLP-1s in all sorts of ways that will give people, I think, more options, and doctors and other clinicians more options in terms of how to prescribe and how long to prescribe and when to come off these things.
I think we all love a good root cause discussion, and I think that's something that's very popular these days. Just one thing that I think maybe is good for us to remember as we move forward in this, that even though it might not like hit the root cause, because Dhruv, you kind of said it, like, what is the root cause of diabetes? I mean, it is so multifactorial. There's so many factors. We don't have one single root cause. But one of these things, and a lot of medicines that kind of change how we like move through the world, is this phrase called disease modifying. These agents, I don't think anyone can argue, aren't disease modifying therapies. I mean, they don't reverse the insulin resistance completely. They don't definitely cure your diabetes, but they do so many things on like the downstream pathways of like excess glucose that they really do put us in a position that we haven't been in before. And for that reason, I think it's why it's gained so much popularity, not just in social media, but just like every time you see somebody who has a weight issue, it's a solid medical discussion to see if this is an option for them. And we even talk about microdosing. I mean, how far low can we go down, like, to prevent a lot of these complications? I mean,
I want to zoom out to something for a second and take it back to maybe a little philosophy here. I apologize for that. I think everyone on this call agrees that there is tremendous value that these drugs bring. I guess is what is happening here is that in some ways GLP-1s, we've bought into the mythology that it is like solving a problem really fast, that we as human beings like need a process and systems to normally attack, whether it's weight loss or addiction, or like, in a way, the corollary to me, I think, is like AI in the right way, that like something is given to us at our fingertips that does make our lives really so much easier and better and healthier. And when we have that capability, it's very difficult for us as humans to be like, great. It seems to us that there's like another truth that is gonna come at us out of nowhere to be like, you didn't pass go, you didn't go through this step and that step and that step, and just to go straight to Boardwalk without going to Baltic Avenue in Pennsylvania and buying all the railroads, you can't have a shortcut for this. Rachael, is that like philosophically, are we in that quandary right now?
Well, I think it depends a lot on what I think the sort of broader question is, what does it mean when we say that we want people to be healthy, that we want to be healthy for ourselves? So in the AI, analogy, like AI can write the cover letter for you. AI doing that doesn't turn you into a great writer, right? Like you're creating an outcome that services a goal that you have.
No, but it makes me not even care
become,
about being a good writer anymore. Right?
So I guess the thing is, that's the question. Like, do we, so when I think about what it means to be healthy, being on a GLP-1 that is potentially helping to keep a set of chronic illnesses in reasonable control and losing 25 pounds helps make a person healthier. But if they aren't eating just sort of smaller amounts, but basically the same diet they were eating before. And if they aren't moving around a ton, and they aren't sleeping, and they're smoking, right? Or they're drinking a lot, or sort of all of these things that we think of as being unhealthy behaviors. I wouldn't say that the GLP-1 has made that person healthy. And I think that this is maybe the distinction between how GLP-1s are often sort of talked about and used, and I don't want to put her on the spot, but I know Mariela does with her patients, which is really help think about them transforming themselves into being people who live in a way that is healthy, who identify as healthy people, who have an approach to maintaining their own health. And that feels like a really distinct set of interventions to me from putting the person on the GLP-1, in the same way that like using AI to write the cover letter is distinct from becoming a writer.
Right.
At this point, though, if you're not going to use the AI, you're like behind the 8 ball here. Like if you're not going to use ChatGPT to write your letter, you're in trouble because everybody else is going to. But Tom,
that's me. I'm not using it, and therefore
I can always tell when Rachel writes me the email.
Hours and hours of my day laboring over one paragraph. But yeah, I'd love to hear about Mariela's sort of thinking.
Thank you, Rachel, for bringing this up. I think really my career completely changed in 2015 when I understood I was working for Novo Nordisk. I was a consultant. I was going all over in giving lectures, and I really was a proponent of GLP-1s until I discovered that you can actually get the same effect by increasing your endogenous GLP-1 by getting the carbs out of the equation. And when you understand that by definition, type 2 diabetes is an intolerance to carbohydrates, end of story, okay? You take the carbs out and the diabetes is gone. And there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. And then my life changed and I started to treat people with food first. Do I still think GLP-1s are great? Yeah, sure. They're a great adjunct, but they're not my first line ever. Because when I take away the carbs and I give people food that is more close to nature, I think what makes us feel strange about this is that we know we're eating all of this terrible stuff, and let's just throw a GLP-1 on it so I can keep eating all this stuff. But the truth is that something feels bad about that. But when you go to eating eggs and cheese and meat and salads, and you suddenly hear that noise go away, okay? Exactly what you were talking about, that suddenly that food noise is quieted down because your brain is getting the nutrition it needs, and you start to
Mariela, can I just say, I've been on those diets. Man, it's so hard.
You know why it's hard? Because the environment is hard. And we could have used this MAHA movement, this amazing opportunity to really make America healthy again. To instead of talking about GLP-1s, why aren't we talking about eating real food for real? Okay, because if you went to the doctor and your doctor said, "Hey, why don't you take out the carbs in your food?" It would really help you. But doctors don't say that, so you don't have the support of the medical establishment in general. I'm generalizing, so I apologize, but I'm saying in general. The doctors don't spend the time on diet, like I talked about at the beginning, because it seems ineffective, and it has been ineffective. But we are now, we switch the food pyramid. This is super exciting. Let's listen to it.
Well, Mariela, let me ask you. I'm so fascinated by what you're saying, and you're not paid by Novo Nordisk. I'm assuming that all that ended.
No, that ended 20 years ago. I mean, in fact, they came.
Yeah, you're not so into what they're. Yeah.
No, they came into my office and said, "What's wrong with you? Why did you stop prescribing GLP-1s all the time?" And it's not that I still prescribe GLP-1s. I mean, 1/3 of my patients I deal with patients that have A1Cs of 9. These are patients that are very sick, okay? And 1/3 of them are already on GLP-1s. Okay. So if this was a miracle drug, they wouldn't be presenting this way. Okay. So these patients are already on GLP-1s, and a lot of times I take them off of it, but not always. And sometimes I even add it. But the point is that these drugs,
but Mariela, let me ask you this, because I'm going to go to you as a doctor, by the way. Will you see me?
I can't wait to help you.
I know. I don't live that far. But here's my question for you, which is, like, I so appreciate that you're saying, eat real food and low carbs and all that stuff. But one of the things, and I'm saying this as somebody who, I was born in a different country, like I was born in India, raised there for like a little bit. The thing that hits you the most when you come to the United States is the supermarket.
I know.
Right? It is literally like you're from another country, right? When you come to the United States, it is like you're in fucking Disneyland, right? Mm-hmm. And you're in aisle 8 and you think you're at Disneyland. And so I eat my cheese, I eat my meat, I eat my eggs, and then I see the cereals and I'm like, there are more cereal options than there are books in my freaking library. How I have to
avoid that lane. You do not go into that aisle. You do not, because that aisle.
But that puts so much pressure on me, Dhruv.
No, but that's because you're driven by the insulin. The insulin that your insulin is making you want that cereal. Okay, so we have to change the system to decrease insulin levels, and the way to do that is to take the carbs out, and then you can control that, and you'll be able to not go into that aisle.
Dhruv,
let's do it.
Dhruv, what's your please walk. I'm going to the grocery store with you, Mariela. Dhruv, talk to me about that it's the insulin that's making me go to that aisle, that it's not the food industry that is making me go to that aisle.
No, it is the food industry. It is the food industry, but it's the food industry that led to that. It's more complicated than that. But anyway.
One of the things that Mariela is getting at is that we have a toxic food environment. And I think there's no getting around that. And which is one of the things that makes, I think, I agree that doctors have not been probably properly trained in nutrition and don't know how to talk about it very well with their patients. And so I think that is certainly something that needs to be done better. But even if we had great advice and great counseling, we live in an environment, and many people live in an environment where there's not great access to fresh food, that we are inundated with all these ultra-processed products. And so it makes it incredibly difficult for people to change their behavior in a sustainable way at scale. We have had, instances in which we're trying to push low-carb diets. I mean, the Atkins diet has been around for 25 years, or if not more. And so it's not as if people have never heard the idea that we should try to cut out simple, refined carbs out of their diet. It's just been very, very difficult. Some of those people have not had the right support. Mariela, it sounds like you give incredible support to the patients that are in your practice. Many patients don't have access to a doctor like you, but more to the point, many patients, almost everyone, lives in an environment in which eating healthy, even if you really want to eat healthy, is very difficult to do.
Mariela, I'm cheating because I've spoken to Mariela about her practice before, but Mariela, do you want to maybe share a little bit about how you approach new patients who come to your clinic who have not been able to manage their illness with lifestyle changes before, and how you work with them to be able to do that? Because I do think it's a pretty radical model, and maybe grounding this conversation in what you do will help people understand your perspective.
Sure. So first of all, I work with Medicaid patients, especially right now in the Bronx and in very poor areas, also in West Virginia, and with patients that are very, very challenged. So this is a type of population that no one would expect that can deal with this kind of demand, right? They have so many obstacles, so many challenges. They work 2 jobs. An unbelievable amount of challenges. And when people are faced with these amount of challenges, the last thing they want to care about is is this a carb or not? But patients are sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're sick of having another medication and another medication, and they're exhausted, and they've lost faith in the system. And so when I come to them and I explain, hey, why don't we try to take real nutrition, just like maybe your grandparents did, and you appreciate that real, the meat and fish and eggs, these are things that have always been the most prized for humans because they're very nutritious food, and they happen to do zero to your insulin levels and to your sugars. Okay, they don't increase sugar. So you have diabetes. Your blood is basically flowing with sugar that your body doesn't want anymore. That your cells in your body do not want this sugar anymore. So let's just take it out. Very simply, okay? Now, most people think that you need carbs, but at this point, when you are sick with diabetes, you don't need carbs. You just take them out and you eat protein and fat, which are not in their natural form, good, healthy fat, meaning not seed oils. And then you will see that that's actually all you need. And they're like, oh, okay, well, let me try that. Oh, but I'm from wherever country, Dominican Republic, and I can't live without rice. Well, let's try it. I think you can do it. And we take out the rice and we check their sugars, and they don't normally have CGMs because this is how it is. And they check their sugar and they're like, oh, you're actually right. And after like 2 weeks of this, they're like, I'm not hungry anymore. And so it's very simple. I don't go into the whole insulin resistance thing because I used to explain it and I realized that they don't need this much explanation. We don't need to explain the whole process of insulin resistance as much as I thought I needed to. The bottom line here is that type 2 diabetes is an intolerance to carbohydrates. It's like you have an allergy. If you have an allergy to penicillin, I'm not going to keep giving you penicillin. I'm going to stop that because your body can't tolerate it. Same thing. So then let's try it. Oh my God, I can't live without the bread. Well, guess what? You can, because if you have 3 eggs with cheese and butter and ham, you are not hungry. I promise you. Okay. And so then you would try it and that's it. And then next thing you know, 1 month later, they're like, wow, I feel so good. I feel so much better. I feel clear. I wake up in the morning with energy. All of this happens reliably, 100%. Okay. If it just does. Okay, 100%. I don't want to, that's not a scientific thing to say. But
Yeah.
I'm saying.
So Rachel, you asked the question. Do you want to respond to what Mariela said?
Yeah, I mean, so Mariela and I have talked before, and I know a little bit about her practice. I also know, Mariela, that you work with community health workers who interface with your patients in between visits to help support them. Is that right?
With coaches
Yeah,
and nutritionists. Yeah, you're right. It's a ton of support. And now also AI is helping with this. So yes.
Right. And so Mariela and I had breakfast last year sometime, and she told me about her practice, and I've been thinking about it ever since, because on the one hand, it's so compelling and it's so exciting, and it's also so radically different from not just the way that I practice or the way that sort of the practices I've ever worked in structure their approach to patients like this, but it's radically different from the way that I've ever approached behavioral change with patients, in terms of being like, just stop eating rice is like a really different type of advice than the advice that sort of I think we get trained to give people, which is to sort of start with them from where they are and think about small changes that they can make that feel not scary to them, to work toward, I tend to work in this sort of harm reduction mode that's very incremental. And what Mariela has done and has seen success with in her own practice is a really different approach from that. In my own life, like Brenda, I've had 2 kids. After both kids, it took me a really long time to lose. I gained a huge amount of weight with both pregnancies. It took a really, really long time to lose that weight. I found doing that incredibly demoralizing and, basically had a hard time sticking to any diet with the rigor that Mariela is describing her patients being able to do after only a couple of weeks. So I find it very hard to picture, and at the same time, very compelling sort of as a case study, in being able to do this, especially being able to do this in the patient populations that she's talking about taking care of, who are not so different from the population that I take care of.
Can I interject here? I think what makes it so hard to do a normal diet, the diet we've been recommending, is that if I tell you eat less rice is much harder than no rice. That's the thing. It's an on-off switch. Because if I take the rice out entirely, then I'm able to burn fat. I'm able to use my fat for as an energy source. But if I eat a little bit of rice, I don't get there. So I'm frustrated. And that's the key, I think.
All right, Mariela, I'm gonna do the no rice thing tomorrow because I got a really good pot of chicken curry that needs some rice to go with it. Let me wrap this up and start to say just one thing, which is kind of looking forward, like 25 years from now, Dhruv, where are we gonna be with GLP-1s? Are we gonna, as far as what we're hoping, what I'm hearing us all say is that this isn't a cure-all, you still have to make those structural changes. I kind of view it from like the studying of just how humans behave. And when they see something that works, they tend to be like, just do that for now. And like, it sort of like absolves them of fixing things structurally. But where do you see all of this in 25 years? I'll ask all of you that.
Well, I hope that some of what we've talked about today comes to pass, both on the side of giving people the tools in their own lives to make healthier choices. I really hope that we've made some progress in terms of creating a healthier societal environment where it's just easier. The default is almost to do and eat healthfully as opposed to what we have today. But on the kind of biotechnological side, I think we're going to have a lot more options for people, and that there will be not just 2 or 3 main GLP-1 medications, but there will potentially be dozens. And those medications will hit different receptors, and they will be very helpful for the people that need it. So I hope that we go down a comprehensive path. And I think one of the risks that we've talked about today is that an over-reliance on technology or on drugs can maybe undermine our efforts in those other areas. But I think that's why it's important to have these types of conversations to point out that, hey, we both need to push forward on access to potentially life-saving medications, but also do the hard work of reforming society more broadly.
Rachel, I just want to bolt on to Brenda's question a little extra, so we want to talk about where you think we're heading here, and we're in 25 years where we'll be. But do you think 25 years from now, when we look back on this moment, do we think the Maha approach of eat real food, challenge the food industry, disrupt the food industry, make it healthier, is that going to be the thing that really changed the trajectory for chronic illness in this country? Or do you think it's going to be the GLP-1s?
I think that the best case scenario is that there is an interplay between those things, that the advent of the use of GLP-1s changes people's behaviors, their taste, the amount that they eat. Like, there's already been all of this reporting, right? For example, about restaurants that used to sort of sell these huge portion size dishes, not being able to do that as much because people actually just aren't as hungry. People on GLP-1s just aren't as hungry. I think the best case scenario is that there is both sort of popular cultural discourse and political movement behind the idea of changing food systems and reorganizing all of society around supporting people to have healthier lifestyles. That is happening, and that's happening as people are also using medications that make it that lower the bar, make it a lot easier for them to engage in those lifestyle changes. And that those things sort of interact in a way that is like mutually beneficial, and you get this virtuous cycle. That's the best case scenario. What I think is really challenging, I like the new food pyramid, I should say. I like it. I like flipping it on its head. I think it's very pretty. And I think it basically does describe a much healthier way of eating than any other nutrition guideline we've had before. And I really like that the administration put out a 10-page guide and not a 400-page guide. And with the idea that that they wanted to sort of support regular people to make choices for themselves, rather than they're writing a guide for nutritionists to then design diets that are going to be handed down to people. I like it, but I think that a lot else about the way that this administration and Maha talk about changing the system, actually, one, still demands of people that they sort of just like act radically different and take a huge amount of individual action in their lives that they're not necessarily being supported any better to do. And I also think that it just runs up against fundamental Republican limitations around how to support the social safety net. And Kennedy makes this claim that for like the same amount of money spent every day, you're going to be able to churn out better meals for the military and for schools and for prisons that totally accord with the aspirations of what the nutrition guidelines are describing. I'm just really skeptical of that. I'm really, really skeptical that for $6 a day, you're going to be able to feed like members of our military service according to the new food guidelines in a way that feels nutritious and adequate for them. And so it's hard for me to picture sort of changing anything meaningfully if you're not investing a ton in supporting people to have access to the food that you're recommending they eat. And that doesn't just mean describing for them differently what they need to eat. I think you really have to actually put money where your mouth is and, change the way that the social safety net functions in a way that helps people get the meals you want them to be having.
And it seems like, Mariela, just will give you the last word here, that, to do any of this without any meaningful pressure to the food industry to really change how it's showing up, it just seems like that's the fundamental elephant in the room, doesn't it?
It does, but I think that we really need to go to the medical establishment first. I think we need to educate doctors and the whole medical establishment, nutritionists, because this is not what we were taught. We were taught to, according to the old food pyramid. So if you're going to make such a change, I totally agree with Rachael. You better put a lot of money to support this change, to make it happen. Otherwise, it's just useless. It's completely useless. But there has to be a huge investment in medical schools, in the entire education system to really make this happen. And of course the food industry. But I'm just starting with the doctors. The doctors still have a lot of say, and patients still listen to doctors. So when the doctor says, if you eat saturated fat, it's going to clog your arteries, you're going to be scared to have that steak. So it matters how your doctor explains things. And so we have a lot of teaching to do to the medical establishment.
The only other thing I would just say to kind of button this up is I think we have to obviously focus on food and what we eat. And, there's the saying that, 80% of weight loss is in the kitchen and 20% is in the gym or whatever that number is. But, if it was just about the food pyramid or if it was just about flipping it upside down, and that's just obviously not going to be enough. I mean, we do need to remember that obesity is a health condition. It's a crisis. It's not just about what is on the plate. And I do think that's kind of like where this like magic of the GLP-1 is. And I hate to use the word magic, but, we didn't really get into it in this episode yet. But this idea that there are these signals in the brain and the food noise, a lot of that is outside. It's a stratosphere outside of what is on the plate. And there's so much fascinating research about the biology that controls hunger and reward and metabolism and addiction and all of those things. And I think that if we, just go at it with flip the food pyramid, food aisle 8 is horrible, we're not really getting the full potential that we can get.
Okay, Dhruv, final word. I see you came off mute.
I agree with what you just said. I think if everyone had consulted the dietary guidelines for the past 30 or 40 years and the food pyramid every time they ate, we would not be in this position right now. And so I am skeptical of how much influence a simple change like that will make. And by the way, it's not just Maha that's been saying this. Michael Pollan wrote back in the early 2000s, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. That's basically the advice. And it's very hard to follow unless we make structural changes to the health system. And in the meantime, in conjunction with trying to make those changes and educating physicians and clinicians on how to educate patients about these things, these are an incredible new tool that we should be using.
All right. Well, Dhruv Khullar, Rachael Bedard, Mariela Glandt. That was a really good conversation. I'm going to probably eat a little less rice with my curry, Mariela, tonight. That's going to be for you.
Well, we'll talk about it tomorrow. We got to get the rice out entirely so you don't have the cravings the next day.
You got to talk to my Indian mother about that first. I want to thank you all so much. By the way, we didn't get into some of the addiction stuff that Dhruv wrote in his New Yorker piece. It really is worth reading. It's pretty remarkable, some of the stories he has in
subscribe.
there. Yeah, subscribe to our podcast, subscribe to the New Yorker. It's a really good piece. Rachael Bedard's piece in New York Magazine is great. Please look up Mariela Glandt and her work in the Bronx, in the communities that she services. And that's our episode for today. Please send us questions and comments to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. I am Brenda Adhikari. He's Tom Johnson. He's Dr. Mark. She is Maggie Bartlett. And we will see you right back here next week.